Hi everyone! Today we are going to talk about flight instruction. Flight instructors probably have the most important key role to make safe pilots. The flying community depends a lot on you that every day spends the day in the classroom or in the cockpit to share your knowledge and experience. Your background, experience and motivation to teach people may differ. Maybe you are a flight time builder. Maybe you are a retired or temporarily laid off commercial pilot in this troubled time. We are going to talk and share some experiences about what challenges we are facing as instructors today. Are you a fellow pilot or an instructor? Please get engaged and feel free to ask us questions or place your comments in Slido. Today I'm joined by Knut Aldrin. He is head of section in the Norwegian Air Sports Federation and flies as an instructor in his spare time. My name is Thomas Hytten. I work as a flight ops inspector with the Norwegian Civil Aviation Authority, and I will be your host for this session. Let's get started. Welcome, Knut, to this talk about the flight instructor. And thank you for joining me for this talk.
Thank you very much for letting me come here.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to have this discussion because I think it's a really important discussion. But first of all, what is your story and what is your background?
Well, my story is I started flying gliders 10 years ago. Then I went on to be a commercial pilot. Flew for a while for a commercial airline in Norway before I lost my job due to the coronavirus. And then after that I started working with the Norwegian Air Sports Federation, which I do presently, and I am also a flight instructor.
Yeah, I think your background is really relevant for this talk. We have some flashcards that we are going to discuss during this talk. And I would like to know a little bit more about the Norwegian Air Sports Federation, because I know that you are organized a bit different than a lot of other air sport federations in Europe. Can you say something about how you do it?
Yeah, we might be that. We're organized as one organization that has all of the air sports activity in Norway under one roof, so to say. And then there are departments for skydiving and hanging paragliding, model aircraft, and motor aircraft, which I'm lucky to be the head of.
Yeah, so you have all the other air sports available, so you can have discussions with other sections and other activities, and that I think that's really important for the safety work as well.
Yeah,
it's quite important that we don't say that this is the only solution, but this is a discussion about our opinions and what we have experienced through our positions and in our work. First of all, we need to take a little bit look into the statistics, and we need to look into what kind of occurrences and accidents that are mostly represented in the training environment. So on this slide from 2016, to 2020, we can see that we have a rise in number of occurrences and reported accidents and serious incidents.
Which is a good thing.
That's a good thing. But we don't know anything about the exposure. So we don't know how many flight hours that have been flown in Europe.
It is important to know that this is not a complete data set, but it gives us a fair picture. From my point of view, I will say that this is very few reports if you compare this to the general number of training flights that probably takes place in Europe.
I know that the GAMA, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, they are doing a survey presently, trying to get the numbers from the pilots in Europe. So I actually urge the pilots and those that are listening to us that they do the survey, and they will find a link to the survey in the chat and in the description below this video as well. So first of all, let's zoom a little bit into the occurrences. And on this slide, we can see that there's a lot of accidents that are happening during the landing phase. Why do you think that is so highly represented on this graph?
I'm not really surprised at all. The landing phase is quite demanding, and you have a relatively short time frame to react if you get into a situation that's not wanted. And also in training flights, there's usually a large number of landings compared to a normal flight, where you take off and you fly to wherever you want to go, or you fly aerobatics or whatever, and then you come and do one landing, or perhaps two landings, one pattern and one landing.
Yeah.
Whereas in training flights, you do routinely 20 landings, perhaps.
And much of the basic training program is just about takeoff and landing, touch and goes.
Yeah.
So you are very exposed to that landing phase in the program, of course. But if we zoom further into the statistics and most represented occurrences, we have landing with bouncing, we have hard landings, and we have nose wheel landings. What do you think? In many cases, we divide between technical skills and non-technical skills. What's your thoughts about the reason behind these kind of accidents?
Well, I'm not sure what the reason would be. You could traditionally say that, oh, you did a bad landing. That means you have lack of technical skills because you're not competent enough in maneuvering the aircraft, landing the aircraft.
Yeah.
But it could just as well be a lack of decision making, where you should have gone around, or after you went around 2 or 3 times, you maybe should have diverted to another airport where the wind is less challenging, or where you're more familiar. So it's very difficult to pinpoint what the actual reason is without delving deeper into that.
Yeah, because the technical skills, that's maneuvering the aircraft.
Yeah, old school things.
Stick and rudder. Yeah. But I think that that's really easy to measure as well, because you can say that, oh, you had a steady speed on the approach. Easy to measure.
You can say the speed is, well, it's plus minus 5 knots. Okay, it's within. And if you're 10 knots, then you're outside.
Yeah.
It's very easy. It's also very easy to give feedback of, well, you need to control your speed more. Whereas, when do you make a poor decision? When do you make a good decision? It's very difficult to quantify or to measure, and it's also difficult to train.
Yeah,
I believe.
I agree. And how do you teach the students about non-technical skills?
That's an interesting question for sure. But I think the most important thing there is to get to know your students.
Yeah.
And imagine that, or realize that your students are different human beings that act in a very different way, and they have different preferences on what kind of way they want to learn.
Because that's a little bit funny. our first flashcard, that is see and know your student.
Yeah.
So how do you know your student?
Well, you should talk with them, get to know them, think about what their background is, their age, their education, and also, importantly, what have they been doing? Have they been just doing the same thing for 20, 30 years? That
Yeah.
they might need some extra hand-holding in learning in something new, whereas if they're routinely just absorb the information, and they might have an easier time learning how to fly as well.
Yeah, you mentioned aged. How do you think that the COVID-19 situation have affected people and students as well that now come into the aviation sector to become pilots?
I think that's first and foremost, a lot of us are probably rusty, technically rusty from flying too little or not practicing enough. But I think that equally important is that our social skills are probably also rusty.
Yeah.
Whereas before you would come to the clubhouse and you would sit there for chat and you would drink coffee and speak with all of the more experienced members. Now you go to the club and you fly and you park the aircraft and you go home, like a rental service. Do you think the COVID could have impacts on the safety culture within a club environment?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the situation now is that we need to focus as instructors on the safety culture and be there as well, be available to make flying safe. And I think that this COVID-19 situation has been a really toll and have highest effect on the younger people, because I'm a middle-aged man and I got my family, and during the COVID situation we had each other, but I know that a lot of younger people, they were studying and more isolated. And I see now that a lot of people are coming out, meetings, in safety evenings in the flying club, and we really need this human contact to have discussions and sharing opinions, because a lot of the communication is done through non-verbal ways of communication.
Yeah.
Like we are sitting here today and
Yeah,
discussing.
and those skills might have degraded, right?
Yeah, of course. I think so, and we need to take that in account when we give new students, when we are flying with new students as well. And our first flashcard is about see and know your student. Knut, what is your technique to get to know the student?
I think the most important trick is to be open. Get to know your students, let them get to know yourself. And ask them if they have a good day, a bad day, and get a feeling of how their mental state is.
Yeah, quite important to get a connection on the personal level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say so. If you have a lot on your plate, you obviously won't be able to absorb as much information during a lesson as you would if you're more relaxed.
Yeah.
So then, as an instructor, it's important to ration how much you feed the student with.
Yeah, of course. That is both before, during, and after the flight.
Yeah, indeed.
So, how about age? Have you any opinions about age when it comes to students? We mentioned younger pilot students now, but how about the older generation?
Yeah, I don't think I have found a definite difference in how I approach students
No.
if they're old or they're young, but I think the older generation is probably more practically oriented.
Yeah, they
So
still
they're-
can change the tires.
Yeah, they can, and they're better at usually better at rules of thumb and seeing the bigger picture. Whereas
Yeah.
the younger students are very well prepared,
Yeah.
very detail focused.
Yeah. I think that's maybe a sign or trait of the generation now, because we have younger people, younger students, that they are very goal oriented. They have high expectations, both for the instruction, for the flying, and especially to themselves, I think. Just before this COVID situation, I had a young guy that was going to complete the basic training, and when he came, he had done 2 hours swimming, and then he's doing the flying, and then afterwards he's going to a mountain. So they fill up the whole day and they deliver all the time. And I believe that they are really good students to learn the theory.
But do you think they have difficulties in translating that to practice?
In many cases, you can't say that all need that, but in many cases, they need a more space, and they need to be pushed more to make the theory relevant in the real world, of course. But we do have we have 4 different areas that we know that teaching in general are going to need a push forward. And the first one is critical thinking. What do you think about critical thinking? How can you apply that in the cockpit?
Well, I think it's very important. We have a lot of sources where we can fetch information. So
Yeah.
If you want to learn something about flying, either you go read a textbook, or you ask someone, or you find something on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to verify techniques and tips and stuff that you find, especially on the internet, to make sure that this is actually tested or tried and tested strategy or technique.
Because today a lot of information that we find on YouTube, it's put there to get likes and subscriptions and stuff like that. So if the information is somehow lifting eyebrows, then it got a lot of hits, but it doesn't need to be right. And everyone on the internet, they are entitled to an opinion. So it's very dangerous to be dragged into something that looks good, but it's not
But really isn't.
checked if it's okay. And I think that one of the best barriers is to have discussions with my fellow instructors. And in a social framework, of course, to have discussions.
So you can validate your findings with someone else who you respect and who's experienced.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. I know that the second bullet point to improve the training for further generation is that we need to focus on communication. What's your thoughts when it comes to communication now?
It's probably more important than ever, especially when we're a little rusty in communicating in the first place, and we're flying in a more and more complex airspace, more and more complex environment. Whereas before you could in many ways fly privately at a uncontrolled aerodrome with not that many actors in play. Now there's a more and more complex environment that you have to communicate with, and there's the unmanned world that's also growing. who also needs space in both airspace and in aerodromes. And
Yeah, we got new users actually,
yeah, we do.
and they don't necessarily need to have any aviation background.
Not necessarily, no.
So I think,
Yeah, communicating intent is probably
both between each other and between different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the third bullet point for future teaching, improved future teaching, is that cooperation is more important than ever.
Mm.
How do you think cooperation, how should we focus on cooperation in aviation and in the training sector?
Well, we should use each other's strengths. So, for instance, if you're very good theoretical instructor, you can use that to fill out where others are not perhaps that strong.
Yeah.
And instead of running a one-man show, you split the burden in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many ways and tools to cooperate today, both in the digital world, of course, but also in the cockpit as well. And the last bullet point in this for future training, that is creativity. That sounds a little bit strange in the aviation sector because,
well, you're not supposed to be creative usually, right?
no, you're supposed to follow procedures and do stuff right. But how can we, in this environment, see a good place for creativity? Why it's important to be creativity even in the aviation industry?
Well, I think it's especially important for general aviation because you usually don't have that much procedures to lean against, whereas in a commercial environment you usually have procedures for most cases, and you're more predefining what kind of operation you're going to do. So I think the creativity bit is really important when you're suddenly put in a situation that you haven't read about or you haven't practiced with an instructor before. So definitely learning to have a sort of a toolbox of techniques rather than solutions for specific problems.
Yeah, I think it's important that actually don't give the solution to the student as an instructor.
But you
That
give
you-
the tools, right?
Yeah, give them the tools instead, and give them the not the problem, but don't give them one problem, but more a case-based problem that they need to solve to use what they have learned in a practical context. I think that's quite important. When we talked about tools, we have made a tool. It's called the Pilot Self-Assessment Scoreboard.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. So here on the screen you can see that we have the Pilot Self-Assessment Scoreboard. It's you can use it to assess yourself when it comes to flying skills and to knowledge. So, of course, somebody will say that, oh, this is gold plating.
Yeah, and it is in a way.
Yeah, it is in a way, because the bare minimums to fly, they are pretty low.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we must not forget that we have performance-based rules. So even though the bare minimum is very low, you as a pilot need to actually assess yourself to see what kind of training do I need. What do I need to become or stay a safe pilot. And I think that with this tool, you can get a better impression of your own performance. And especially if you are an instructor, you can use this training card, this scoreboard, to assess the student together with the student to find out which areas you should actually look into to improve. What is the most low-hanging fruit to improve?
And this is also useful for pilots who have completed their license, right? And even instructors.
Yeah, I think so. You took the card.
I did.
You
You should try to assess yourself.
And
Where did you end up?
well, I consider myself a current pilot, but I was actually in the yellow.
Yeah.
So that was well, not a wake-up call, but a realization that I'm not at the top of my game. So I should be
No, and that's
careful.
yeah, and that's quite natural now because we have been through the winter with dark days here up in north. So it's not that easy to get VFR conditions, and we have the weather as well. And it's not that easy to fly as much as
No, usually a
you
lot of
should
clubs
actually.
shut down their activity in the winter,
Yeah,
right?
it's terrible in this part of the year, but now it's looking brighter.
Yeah.
Finally, the card, if you fill it in online, you will have the possibility to get a score, both for skill and for knowledge. And if you press the button in the right down corner there, you will have a recommendation actually from the card, what you should do or what you could do to improve.
And where can you find this card?
I will put a link in the chat and maybe in the description below the video afterwards. Yeah. So I hope that will work for the pilots out there. Be curious. Learn from each flight. How do you think an instructor should improve or stay current today? What's your trick?
Well, I don't know if I if I actually have a trick, but I do think it's important to be curious, because if you're just remaining status quo and thinking, oh, I have already learned what is to learn, then you're actually drifting into failure.
Yeah.
So I think you should be curious. You should be interested in finding, is there anything that can be improved? What's the reason behind what I do as my own mistakes and what I do well, but also in the culture in the school or club that you're operating. Why is it a good culture? Why is it a bad culture? And can you do anything to improve it?
I think a really important keyword here is motivation.
Yeah.
And I'm quite focused on my own motivation because I know that this will rub off on the student if I'm not motivated.
If you're sitting there and thinking, oh, why am I why am I in this right seat?
Yeah. So actually, for my own case, these days I just do aerobatic instruction because I think that is really rewarding.
Yeah.
And now I have been flying basic training for very many years. And I think that is nice to do something that both as me and myself as an instructor and the student like to do. I think that's a good foundation to give good instruction as well.
I think it's important to realize also that you should do what you yourself think is interesting and fun.
Yeah.
Because like you say, you will definitely influence the student with your mood.
Yeah, I think it's quite important, and to make a good learning environment.
Yeah.
To have a motivated instructor, that is a really good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that there's a lot of reasons why, and motivations for instructors as well, why they fly as instructors. We have the time builder.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the time builder? Just short.
Well, there are a lot of them, and they are motivated and effective.
Yeah,
usually.
I think they are really important for the general aviation community and even for the industry as well, because they get a lot of hours in a short time. They produce a lot of hours for the students, so it's a short way to get the license. And then we have also the retired pilot or maybe the laid off pilot in these days, as yourself.
Yeah, there are some of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think especially the older retired pilots are a really good source of experience.
Yeah.
So somewhere
indeed.
for the younger instructors like myself to lean on and learn from.
For sure. And I know that a lot of retired pilots like to keep themselves in the game. So they are also motivated to do this, and they have time to do this as well. Because I see myself as a recreational instructor, more or less. I do that in my spare time when I'm not working or doing other stuff. So for me, the biggest problem is that I don't have enough time in my life to spend it all to do instruction. But I'm really to have a student and get that connection we talked about. It's really rewarding as well, and you learn something each flight, and it's so strange because I think that now I can't learn more about this. Oh yeah,
You can always.
Karma comes like, hold my beer. So that's good, and we must not forget professional instructors as well, because they are doing a really big job to learn people the skill of flying.
And what impresses me often with professional instructors is how thorough they are. So they're usually very structured.
But I think that's a product of the ATOs as well.
Yeah, it is.
Because
flying in a system where everything is predefined gives you good structure in your teaching.
And that's quite natural also because they are preparing the pilots for maybe a commercial career. And you know that procedures are really important there. But I think the strength of this is that you have a lot of different motivations and backgrounds. So for students that can actually have the opportunity to fly with different instructors, I think that is good.
And for instructors to learn from others with different backgrounds.
From each other as well. Yeah, that's a good point. I agree to that. And for all these instructors, I think a really important point is that we all need to be ambassadors for flight safety. That sounds maybe a little bit cheesy, but the instructor role is so important in every pilot's life, because you can remember your bad instructors and you can remember your really good instructors.
Yeah.
They have made an impression. Both the authorities and also we do make safety promotion material. And I think it's so important that each instructor actually use that in the practical world. Because if we just make safety promotion material and nobody use the material, it's just a waste of time.
It wouldn't be safety promotion then.
No, just promotion. And we talked a little bit before we started this talk, Knut, and we talked about technology.
Yeah.
And how does that affect the instructor?
Well, there is way more technology in the cockpit or in the GA cockpit than there used to be just a few years ago.
Yeah.
You don't need to go that many years back before flying with a paper map was the common thing, right?
Yeah.
Whereas now you're surprised if someone shows up with a paper chart and without an iPad, right?
I know.
And then you have all these different apps, Garmin, you have ForeFlight, you have SkyDemon, probably several others.
That's a really good point, because today the airspace, actually in Norway as well, the airspace changes a lot all the time. So if you're going to follow up the AirAx and you have going to have a student that need to have the proper information and the proper chart, they wouldn't do anything than just updating the paper chart. So I think it's important. And I think it's also important for airspace infringements as well.
It's a very good tool
to
raise your situational awareness of where you are. But then again, it can easily steal too much focus.
Yeah.
You're, instead of actually reading the chart and finding out where you are and looking ahead, you're just seeing a dot. You're just steering a dot and guiding this dot towards the end goal.
Yeah. So basic skills and knowledge, maybe more knowledge about how maps work is it's still important. So
But I think the maybe most challenging aspect is the diversity of technology. So whereas you before would learn one map, it's a straight map. Now you have to juggle 5, 6 different apps.
Yeah.
Plus perhaps a Garmin G1000. So that some aircraft have. And some other glass cockpit solutions as well that are different than the Garmin. So you can't really just learn one way of doing things.
No, and I think this is important because the student expect that the instructor know the systems in and out. And if you fly different aircraft, even light aircraft, they have different systems, and they are starting to get quite
very
complex.
complicated. Yeah.
So I think it's important maybe to say that okay, I know this system, and if you don't know all the details, it's fine to actually say that it's.
Yeah.
I need to look into that as well. But for me, when it comes to be curious, I found my way of handling that is that I try to take new ratings, new training actually.
Yeah. So new things that you haven't done before.
Yeah. It's so nice to just lean back and be a student, even as an instructor.
Yeah.
So going to courses and listening to others, I think that's quite nice.
Yeah.
For me, aerobatic is a good thing, but you have a lot of other ratings as well.
Yeah, doing a tail wheel, for
Tail
instance,
wheel is a good thing.
or just a new model.
Yeah. Let's check out the next flashcard. Allow the student to make mistakes. This is a really hard borderline.
It is.
Yeah.
Because if you let the student make too big of a mistake, it's dangerous, right?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to decide if how far should the student be allowed to do mistakes. But I think that with experience, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
To know where things are getting a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to know when I should be taking over. Because like you say, if you don't let the student make a mistake, if you just correct before things happen, you're stealing a lot of the opportunity for learning.
I agree, because the student may need to make mistakes to get things right, actually.
Yeah.
And you can tell people this is wrong or this is not good, but if they experience that, and they, it's a borderline there as well, because if the students get afraid, that is not a good thing.
No.
But to have a good learning environment where it's okay to do mistakes, and you can look to the instructor, and even if you do some mistakes, it's okay. That is one thing. But another thing is that actually do mistakes, and you talked about mistakes, communication mistakes on the radio. That can be a little bit tricky.
It can be. So, for instance, if you have a student that has misunderstood the clearance or something, and you catch this, and you know it's, should you correct the student, or should you let them fly the wrong routing?
Yeah.
And see what happens.
Yeah, and maybe they will be corrected by the ATC.
Yeah, maybe.
But in those cases, it's very nice to be at a smaller airport, which is not that busy.
Yeah. You might end up in a
Yeah.
bit of trouble if
Yeah.
you...
And I think that we never must forget the communication with the ATC people.
No.
That's quite important as both ATO or GTO or individual instructors as well.
And how do you think this can be improved?
Well, first of all, a lot of people said that when the security regulation was tightened, they said that, oh no, we cannot have any communication with ATC people anymore. But I think that you can make local forums, meetings as well. And I know that my flying club, they have meetings where they invite the ATC personnel and talk to each other. And that's really good. And of course, you have a lot of airports and airfields that don't have the same strict rules when it comes to security, and the tower is still available. But it's quite important to have them in the loop.
I think it's important to recognize that there are so many actors in aviation that need to play together and communicate. And especially in a learning situation where you have a student pilot that's perhaps not totally on board.
Yeah, but that's really important, and I think it's also important now in the post-COVID-19 situation that we keep up that contact and communication we had before this COVID came. We have some bullet points when it comes to doing mistakes. First of all, I think that it's important to be clear about the objectives of the lessons, because the student need to know what standards her or she or he she or he need to achieve. And I think it's also important to be clear when it comes to feedback and aware that the self-esteem is important for the student.
Yeah. Do you give your students a lot of praise when you fly well?
A praise?
Yeah.
I only got English level 4, so what do you mean?
Skryt.
Huh?
Skryt.
Oh yeah.
English level 4.
So the next flashcard, it's about use practical and real life cases.
Yeah.
And here we have that the theory need to meet the practical and the real life. How do you do that?
Well, I think it's probably overlooked in many ways, because you teach the theory, you teach, for instance, these are the rules, these are procedures, and so forth, and well, you don't have the ability as a student necessarily to understand why. How can it be useful to know, for instance, what the rules are, what the regulations are?
What's the reason?
What's the reason? So, if you have the ability, try to find practical scenarios. For instance, where you're navigating, you're getting into poor weather. How can this help you? Or even better, if you have an experience yourself that illustrates applicability of theory. That's even better. At least, yeah.
I think that a good source is accidents reports, actually.
Yeah.
And I share the reports with the students as well.
Yeah.
And for me, they are a really good source to set up the scenarios.
Yeah.
To have the same factors. Because when you read the report, you think that, how could this happen? this is not possible in many cases. And then if you use the same cases in the training, you see that this is possible. If the person is stressed or maybe late for the lesson and stuff like that. So, and that is quite important, that you have a good balance between stress and teaching, I think.
Yeah, there are probably a lot of good learning points in most incident reports.
Yeah. But when you have a case and you use it, it's important to find the good balance where if you're doing scenario-based training, it's quite important to have a positive stress level. If you give the student too much tasks and stress, I think it will be negative. The teaching will be quite low. The value of the teaching will be low.
You need to be at the right level, right?
Yeah, and keep it there.
Yeah.
All the time. And I think, just as you said, that just to connect the dots, to give the proper understanding is quite important. Because today, as we talked about, procedures, they are often in place. The theory, the knowledge is there, but then you need to connect it to see when it's relevant. And that then
it's difficult.
Yeah, because that brings us into decision making.
Yeah.
And we know that decision making is, in many cases, the source for both accidents and incidents as well.
Yeah, and it's hard to practice.
Hard to practice. Yeah. Another thing when it comes to practical and real life cases is that we know that the regulation today is very performance based.
Yeah, what does that mean, Thomas?
For me, that means that you need to fulfill the bare level, the minimum level, but you need to take care of the level you need to fly safely.
Yeah, so you need to have an understanding of what is required to fulfill the regulations rather than just reading the list.
One thing is to fulfill a regulation. That is one thing. But another thing is that in many cases you have to assess the risk. And if you don't have the knowledge and if you don't have the experience and you cannot put it into the right context,
well, you can't do that.
Then it's really hard to be performance based.
Yeah.
Because you don't actually know what can hit you.
So, do you think performance-based regulations are a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing, but you need to have a good safety culture to use performance-based regulations. And one thing is safety culture. The other thing is that it's quite demanding when it comes to knowledge as well. And to have good instructors that can relate and make these cases so relevant that the student know how to handle risk, I think that is one of the maybe biggest challenges we have today. Okay, let's move on to the next flashcard. Challenge the student and make flying fun. Okay, so we are going to have fun now.
We're gonna start having fun now.
Yeah.
I guess having fun is what brought us into aviation in the first place. And what you talked about before, when you're as an instructor doing something that you despise, that you're really tired of.
Yeah. Lost the motivation.
Yeah, and it makes you really unmotivated and a really poor teacher. I think it's important, especially in recreational flying, to remember to have fun, both in teaching and to ensure that the students have fun.
Yeah. I think in many cases it's very, very rewarding when you see that not having directly fun, but you see that the benefit, and you can also see how people grow.
Yeah.
So fun is one way to say it, but I think it's so nice to see that what you call it, when the light bulb comes on. Yeah.
When they really understand the concept.
And they connect all the information and really solve task in a good way. I think that's then it's fun to be an instructor.
Yeah, definitely.
And we talked about how this also rubs off. If you're not having fun doing the instruction, I don't think the students either is going to have so much fun.
No.
And I think if you learn something that is positive, I think, and you experience it as something positive, you had fun, you had a good time, I think the information will stick much better. Some instructors use a lot of time to make the student to reflect. Do you do that?
I usually do that. I tend to, after we've been flying, ask the student to debrief me instead of debriefing the students. And then if there's something that obviously misses from the briefing, I'll fill in. But I think it's a very good way of starting to play the ball over to the learner.
I agree. It's a good way, and don't give the answer first, but make them think about the good things that they did, and of course what that can be improved as well. And the never-ending question is, are you going to give the good feedback first or the bad feedback first?
I don't really have an answer for that. It depends, I guess.
I don't think it's a good thing to give bad feedback.
Not at all.
No, but to be honest and constructive is quite important. And I know that some students have high expectation to themselves. So if you give them feedback about what they need to improve, some are a little bit more resisting. So you need to know the student as well.
Yeah, you do.
You're back to that. This is a human relation, and find the right triggers for each individual student. And Knut, that was our last flashcard.
Yeah.
So I will just say thank you that you joined me for this talk.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, and I hope we can do this again in the future. And at last, I just want to thank you that followed our talk and watched our discussion here. And have a great day and evening.